Move now to our penultimate panel of the day. So if I could ask Ishmael, Jennifer and Mark to come to the platform. The penultimate panel discussion is From Guilt to Good, turning IT from environmental villain to sustainability hero. Now, this is something that's sort of been bubbling, a tension that's been bubbling through the day, actually, that sometimes an emphasis on the challenges posed by technology can overshadow the positive impact that its responsible use could have on enhancing sustainability, especially in the public sector. That might include on operational effectiveness and efficiency, data-driven decision-making, smart infrastructure, and citizen engagement. Because if we use technology for the right reasons, in the right way, it could help us to save the planet. Again, we have three brilliant speakers for you, one of whom you've already heard and two of whom have been mentioned multiple times from the panel. So first we have Ishmael Burdu, who is the lead sustainability business architect for DWP, who wants to help make the UK a world leader in digital sustainability. And he challenges teams by asking the question, what can we do to develop more environmentally sustainable digital services? We'll then hear from Jennifer Marks, the head of digital sustainability in the Government Digital Service. Digital professional with a passion for sustainability, Jennifer united her skills and interest and carved out a unique work stream focused on measuring and reducing the carbon emissions in digital services and embedding sustainability into them. She's now been in the civil service for over 5 years, working on projects including digital services for Brexit and most recently, as you've already heard today, One Login for Government programme. And then we'll hear again from Mark Butcher, the Director of Positive Cloud Limited, who you've already heard speak. But again, just as a reminder, Positive are dedicated to pioneering green ops, FinOps and DevOps across IT, with a focus on helping public and private sector organisations modernise their IT services. So again, we'll hear from each of our brilliant panel in turn. We'll have a bit of a conversation and then we will come to you again for questions. Do keep those coming on Slido from the start if you'd like. We're going to go first to Ishmael.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. I'm here with two of my favorite people in this
checks in the post
environment. And I also wanted to just thank Matt for helping organize this. And when we sat down to plan out the day, I whimsically said, let's do something positive about digital sustainability. So that's why we're here. I think if we're going to be thinking about a positive impact of digital, there are many things we could talk about. But I think it requires us to move away from a business as usual, let's just trudge on the way we've been doing things. It might need a rethink in terms of economic models and social models around digital.
Great, thank you. Jennifer.
Thanks, Gavin. I agree fundamentally with what Ishmael was saying. And I think one of the things we often forget is that technology is a huge enabler. And we need to harness its power. We need to harness it for the good of what it can bring us, not just the bad. We can talk about the huge energy and water usage of data centers. We can talk about the massive carbon footprints of the services we use, the e-waste piling up, the rare elements. We can talk about all the negative things until the cows come home. But that, I genuinely find that conversation usually paralyzes us into indecision because it seems so overwhelming. And we need to change our narrative on technology to start looking at what we can do to improve climate change, to reduce climate change. How can we make it better? What is the story we want to tell? Because nothing moves as fast as technology. It is all pervasive. It affects every community, every sector. Everything we touch is impacted by technology. So let's harness it for good. Let's look at how it can help us fight the change. It can be our greatest ally, and it really should be.
It's rare that I'm asked to talk about anything positive.
Come on.
Companies called positive.
Exactly. I'm dredging deep. No. But in all seriousness, there is one of the very interesting things about being involved in the sustainability world is it's a community that shares. And the very fascinating thing is, if you think about that long tail I talked about earlier, the younger generations who are coming through are the ones who actually feel most directly impacted by this and are most engaged in it. So if you want to actually drive change, getting some of the younger generations coming in to actually get involved in a lot of the decision making, there's a lot of value they can add and bring. And they see things in a very, very different way. Because it's very easy to get locked into the old system's way of thinking that things are impossible because it was tried before, because it didn't work. But actually, if you think differently, you can utterly transform services with some very simplistic approaches. Yeah. There's a lot you can achieve.
Great, that was cheery. Thank you. Ishmael, when we were chatting before this panel, one of the things you were thinking about was sort of where tech might be useful in mitigation and adaptation when it comes to fighting climate change. I wondered if you want to say a bit more about where you think it could play a role.
Yeah, I guess the focus today has been on mitigation, like how can we reduce the emissions of digital services, and that's really key. But I think we're also moving now into a point of adaptation. I think Ben mentioned a few things around temperature change. We've got other sort of geopolitical forces around access to rare metals, and that's creating tensions around the world, not only sort of modern slavery, but actual threats of war. So we need to move beyond. I think there's a good quote from a guy called Samuel Alexander. We talk a lot about efficiency today, and efficiency is important. I think the quote is something like, efficiency without sufficiency is lost, digital. And I think that's where the adaptation part needs to be. We need to live within these planetary boundaries and set ourselves upper limits of consumption, I think, and that's the sort of adaptation part.
Thanks. And Jennifer, I think citizen engagement of the sort of things I listed in the introduction to this panel is the one that you're particularly interested in.
Yeah, we've spoken a lot about, and you've heard a lot today, not least from Natalie, about the importance of engaging people and how to do it. But I think that, and I certainly found it when I talked to my friends, very few people actually realise the impact digital has on their lives and on their personal carbon footprints. And, you know, Mark said about being rude, and as much as it goes against everything it is about being British, we actually should think about how we can reduce the amount of silly emails we send just to say thanks. I also think that it's not just about work, it's personal life. I personally advocate the Marie Kondo approach for your inbox. If your email doesn't spark joy, unsubscribe unless it's HMRC or your bank, otherwise you just can't do that. Literally, it is very, very freeing when you suddenly hit unsubscribe numerous times. And also, delete your WhatsApps. Like, you do not need 7 years worth of messages. Just hit delete. Actually, everyone get your phones out. Get your phones out. Everyone, you've probably all got multiple phones. I certainly do. I have a work one and a personal one. Switch your phone onto low power mode. Everyone go into your settings, hit the battery, it doesn't matter which device you have, and activate low power mode. It doesn't affect the performance of your phone, but it actually saves energy. And it is a tiny thing you can do. It is a butterfly effect. It is a tiny thing you can do. Once you've charged your phone, and please don't do it overnight, you can sit there at your desk in the morning and charge it for an hour. Your phone's charged very quickly. Switch it on again and keep doing it. Tiny things have a huge difference. These are the things we have to do. Everyone probably uses Google as their browser or their search engine. Why not use Ecosia? Why not use Ocean Hero or Lilo? All sorts of different, they are 3 different eco-friendly search engines that each do different things. So Ecosia plant trees for every search. Ocean Hero supports the oceans, unsurprisingly. But if you're really wedded to using Google, please switch Gemini off. I promise you, when you're Googling up to find the name of that Disney character you can't remember from 30 years ago, Google search will do the same job as Gemini. It will just cost less energy and less water usage. Just switch it off. I promise you, your life will not be detrimentally impacted for it. But it comes back to this whole idea that so much is pervasive in society that we forget to switch these things off. We forget what we don't need. We forget that I think of the example I gave, plastic bags. Who remembers using plastic bags every time you went for a shop and having thousands of plastic bags? Suddenly, an edict came down. Everyone had to use tote bags. You had to take a recyclable bag with you. Everyone now does it. Have one in my bag. How many people have a reusable bag in there with them today, just in case they pop to the shop? Emma. But we have to do these things and think differently about our approach to sustainability. It's about changing it, and it shouldn't be a sacrifice. It should be a choice. Better decisions will make better life choices. Financially, for your health, for so many reasons, and that's not just personal, that's across your professional lives as well. I can keep going, but I'll stop there.
So I think we can add just switch it off to be ruder and just enough technology as T-shirt slogans coming out of today. Mark, when we were chatting and when you were talking earlier, a lot of this is a sort of people problem, not a tech problem as such. I think you've done some work recently with a bank where there was quite an interesting sort of control experiment that you could see between different teams and their energy consumption.
Well, it was, so there's so many vaguely nefarious examples of things that we've done to test the reality of implementing these strategies. Are we proud of some of them? No, not really, but the outcomes were good. So one of them was there's a large American financial services organisation with the CTO, who is the biggest skeptic you've ever seen of anything to do with climate change whatsoever, thought it was complete nonsense, but was willing to do some tests because he'd been told he had to care by leadership. So he agreed to split that. So that they had a cloud operating environment where a FinOps team who knew of loads of savings, but no one would listen. No one would implement anything. They knew they could save a huge amount of money on the resources they consume. No one could be bothered because they were making loads of money. No pressure, don't worry. So we split them into two teams, and one team had just cost-saving metrics from the FinOps team. The other team had cost and carbon metrics. The interesting thing was, so what they did was they gave exactly the same recommendations for similar platforms, and they wanted to see what would happen around the implementation of them and their desire to implement. What they found was the team with just the cost targets implemented only about 15.8% of the recommendations, and the team with the cost and carbon metrics implemented 63% of the recommendations. And what they found was the defensiveness dropped as well, because in my early days of FinOps, as you can imagine, I'm a little bit blunt at times about things, and it's how to not make friends with engineers is to go and tell them they're wrong about everything and they're massively overspending and they don't know what they're doing. It gets the reaction you would expect. And what happens is people get very defensive and put the walls up and explain that it's not oversized, it's not over-provisioned, it's not wasted, you just don't understand how to build secure, resilient platforms and services, you idiot, now get out of the room. It's a bit like a confession, that one. But what we found is when giving them a KPI that they actually felt attuned and cared about, they were more likely to drop the defensive mode, be less protective about it, and actually start thinking of not just the ways that they could do that thing, but we found they were massively creative about all the other things they could do. They suddenly started coming up with ideas and things we hadn't even considered, hadn't thought about, and wouldn't even have been on the list. And the amount of savings just went through the roof, and it went up to about $9 million in the first quarter saved alone, just on cloud spend. And that CTO went from being the biggest skeptic to the biggest supporter in the entire world, and now everyone has carbon targets in their entire environment. And importantly, they've spiraled it across everything they do in tech now as well, so every decision is now supported by a carbon efficiency KPI.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to start getting some questions from Slido, because we've had a couple of great ones in already. And following on from that, somebody asks, in terms of engaging people in your organisation, how important is observability and creating a story through data? Do you have any examples of that?
To me, it's one of the most important things. If you can't tell a story with the data, people do nothing with the outcome. It has to be granular, it has to be contextual, and it has to be related to their specific environment. I think you probably got some better examples from your side.
We spoke this morning about the example with one login. Until we had the data, until we could prove that we could make that sustainable decisions led to a reduction, until we had those dashboards, it didn't matter what we said. It was just all myth. And then suddenly it became this, it just snowballed. People were interested, they wanted to get involved. And that's, you have to have the data. And it has to be something that, Natalie didn't touch on it. What has added to the success we've found with the teams was that we've given them their data. We've given them access to the dashboards. We have enabled teams within their own professions to start looking and understanding what they could do themselves. I'm not a project manager, but I'll tell you what, when I gave the product team their data, they were delighted. They have taken it, they've got a task force now, they are fully into it. And as silly as it sounds, we empowered them. That is what data is, it's empowering. These are professionals. Particularly within one login, everyone's a professional. They know what they need to do. They just need the information with which to make those better decisions.
And I would say as well, one of the things that I think you did very well was the linking it to the actual applications, the services and the environments that were actually being consumed. So it was very contextual to the people. They could see and feel that was within the realm of what they could control. So it wasn't this big abstract number over there somewhere. It was something that they could see directly. I do X and Y happens. Done. And that's why the observability and monitoring part is really important, because you need to get it really down to as far granular detail as you can. And I also recommend all the time moving away from the scale of the impact to the efficiency of the resource consumption. Because it's very easy for the big applications and services to get blamed for consuming the most. And that's actually because they just happen to be big. You can't make them smaller because they're big applications and services. And the loads of stuff gets hidden as a result. But if you get efficiency, then people start thinking about the efficiency of what they're consuming within the boundaries of what's within their actual control and their role.
Bit of a tangent, but what you're saying sounds a little bit like a reluctant uncle or parent who's overweight or out of shape and needs a bit of biofeedback. You know, blood pressure monitors and BMI checks, like how much have I lost this week, or can I get my blood pressure below 120 over 90 or something like that.
But with weight loss, as everyone knows, you can have every metric under the sun telling you until you want to make that change.
Yes. Yeah.
Something has got to prompt you to make that change.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. And if, you know, in One Login's case, it was the data. It did prompt the change. Can't speak about every other organisation, but I'd hope that with technology professionals, data does enable change, does enable belief.
And I would also say very strongly that some people disagree with me when I say this, but I don't think it's a dashboard problem. I think it's a data problem. And what you need to do is to get your data into a sensible, solid, consolidated state, but take the data to the users. Don't expect the users to come to the data. And what I mean by that is get it into their systems of record, get it into the tools that they use on a daily basis, get it into their daily flow of working life. Because if you go and build a totally separate environment and you expect them to come to it, you'll get success for about 2 or 3 months. And it will drop dead because they'll get either bored, distracted, have other things to do, other priorities. But if you inject it literally into their faces, in their dashboards and their systems, it's there in front of them and they can see it every single day with every single interaction they do, whether it's Slack, DevOps dashboards, FinOps tools, TBM tools, observability tools, get the data to them.
It's got to become of everyday working life, like muscle memory. It's got to be something you do all the time. You have to think sustainability. Think digital sustainability. There we go. Yay.
There's the social media clips. I suppose adjacent to those points about making it people's sort of everyday experience, but also going back to the sort of phone battery saving example from earlier, somebody's asked, why aren't low power modes the default? We shouldn't have to consciously make the better decisions. They should be the default. So there's also a sort of general point there about what should be on us and what architectural choices can others make that might push us in the right direction, and is that the right way to think about it?
I mean, the short answer is I wish I knew why it was a default. And in fact, in GDS, we are busy right now campaigning to the powers that be to make lower power mode the default on all laptops, because we can't actually change it ourselves on our laptops. And there is a whole reason why, I'm sure, but we are going through the process to say that the majority of people can just use low power. Not everyone is a dev that needs huge amounts of power. I don't even think the devs need huge amounts of power. But the majority of people could just be on low power mode. Everyone plugs in their laptop. Not that many people work away from their desks, work or travel for work. Certainly GDS they don't. Like, we can make better decisions from the offset, but these are things that actually maybe it's a time to chat to the manufacturers. Lower power mode should be enabled by default. It shouldn't even be switched off once you hit 100%. You know, there should be better ways of doing these things, but you need to have those conversations in a really positive way and make it and bring them and make them part of the solution, not always identify them as the problem.
So, as a species, we're predictably dumb. And what I mean by that is it affects us in how we wonder why things are set a certain way, and it's because of how we buy them in the first place. It's how we go to market to buy and acquire the resources, the platforms and the tools. We go to the vendors and we tell them we want the fastest, shiniest, bestest thing they could possibly ever sell us, and then we wonder why they sell us the thing that is fastest, shiniest and best. And what I mean by that is they want to prove that everything is at max power. So when they sell us a thing, they sell it to us at max power. And funnily enough, on the work we're doing in the Scope 3 team, one of the questions that we're asking the vendors is explicitly around the settings they have on physical infrastructure that they're supplying. Do you offer performance and power tuning facilities, and what are the default settings for them? So that they have the opportunity to not be negatively judged by supplying you something which is tuned for a lower power setting in the first place that might affect the performance of the device. So actually what we're trying to do is to influence the change at that end, so they don't feel penalised, so they're more motivated when they sell you a thing to sell it in the right way to you. Then it comes down to then all the people inside your organisation. So when if you go back into the old world of, say, data centres and infrastructure and operating teams, people are paid to maintain things and make sure they're working and operating, so their natural reaction, if that's how they're paid, is to deliver them at max power to make sure they can get the most out of everything. So if people aren't motivated to change, they generally won't change. And that's what we need to shift, is that thinking to enable people to make the better decisions.
Tom D says on Slido that you can set up automations to automatically turn your phone onto low power mode, and says yes, it should be default. I'm going to take one more question from Slido before we send the mic round. And this is from Anonymous, who's referring back to the question for this session, actually. Let's say I'm in poverty. Tell me what sustainability hero I can look up to as a citizen. I want hope where I don't feel I have any control. So a sustainability hero
Yeah, I can try and answer that. I need to catch up with this guy who works for a company called HETA that does distributed heating from data centers. What I want to talk about is I represent DWP, and we're trying to help the most vulnerable people in society. And we've got something like 1.7 or 1.8 million people who don't have access to technology because of affordability. And heating is another area where there's not affordability. I think we need to rethink how we engage with digital, make it affordable for everybody who needs it or wants it, and also move away from centralized models to distributed models, edge computing and things like that, it's going to require some sort of leveling out of society for digital sustainability to be something that's worth fighting for.
And so to hop off the back of that, it's one of the things where if you think of the kind of the old days where you would have like the local council leader leaning on the spade in a big housing development to take the photo, there's the opportunity for this virtual version with things like HETA where you could use your services for community good and it won't cost you any more because it's a thing you're already going to do. So if you think you had a load of workloads that you were going to throw at a big cloud provider, why not take some of those workloads, the proportion that's suited, and use it for community good? What a lot of these companies who are coming through they don't need the technology, they don't need the locations, they actually just need the workloads. So they need people who are willing to throw them compute functions and workloads so they can actually process it to generate the heat that would help to end fuel poverty. So actually, as a government bodies, we could actually all together help end fuel poverty for a large proportion of society simply by spending the money we're already going to spend in a subtly different way. So there's no incremental cost, but there's a massive benefit to society which would have a huge positive impact. And it's a fairly easy decision to make once you understand the outcome of it.
And in terms of computers, I was talking to a company in Harrogate, and they can put a desktop on somebody's house for £30, a refurbished device. So there should not be a barrier for entry to this, but it's going to require a rethink of how we use digital.
Let's go to the audience who would like to ask a question.
Thanks. I'll just ask the question I posted on Slido, but digital gives us the power to radically redesign the way services function. Do the panel have a great example that you know about this kind of redesign unlocking sustainability?
Caught us off guard.
So I can't remember if I used, because I've been to another panel at lunchtime, so I can't remember if I used this example already. So if I have, just tell me to be quiet. There's the one around the bank with the data center consolidation through use of splitting production and dev and test environments into two areas, which has driven a massive consolidation in data centers. Because what they had was a mode where everything was treated with kid gloves, ultimate design, availability, etc. 70% of the workloads being dev and test, and only 30% being production. They've now split those out totally, so now dev and test can have basically a low level of availability, which means that has a massive impact on the size and scale of what is required to deliver the platform. And that has for them, it's driven out hundreds of millions of dollars worth of saving, and a huge proportion of carbon has gone down. So they think just from a power consumption alone, it's going to save them 10 gigawatts of power a year, just in power consumption. And that's before you get into the embodied emissions. And that simply came from a shift in thinking, and it has changed absolutely nothing. Because guess what? The platforms still don't go down. They're still highly available, they're still resilient. No one's noticed. Apart from now, they just don't have the tick box to say this is now the platinum class for every single thing.
I suppose there's a couple of examples I like to give because it's important to get the audience engaged in the topic. And Branch Magazine's a really good example where basically the color of the website will change according to the carbon intensity. So on a cold, windless day with lots of cloud cover, it'll be sort of a amber color, and they'll turn off various features. And then on a sunny, windy day, it's green, and you can take as much as you want. So that type of thinking, I think, in our designs to get the public engaged in the transition as well, not just relying on engineers to make things better, but also bring the public along with it.
And I have also seen there's a large mobile retailer who has they've used their data to analyse and work out how is the best path to engage with their customers based upon their location to actually the local retail shop. So they've basically mapped out their customer journey from top to bottom to work out how we're going to hound them and extract every single penny from them. But whether it's by mail, by phone, by text message, by visit, and they now have it mapped out exactly. And they're also the way they're showcasing devices, they're going to the more sustainable by default as being the option in the search. So they're showing the most sustainable options at the top of the list rather than it being something you have to go from default high price to low price, which is what their previous version.
Let's take another audience question.
Hi. I appreciate you asked this question, Ishmael, on our panel just now, but I'm just really interested in the whole sufficiency concept, because we're so used to talking about efficiencies We also talk about trying to be carbon aware. I suppose these days there's a sort of aspirational thing to a large extent, as far as I understand it at least, which means trying to make use of green electricity when it's available, do more when there's green electricity available. But how do we kind of move on to that sufficiency? So how do we start threading that in? Because it's really alien to a lot of us. We're obviously very growth focused, our economy at large and as businesses. Sufficiency is kind of something else, isn't it? Like putting absolute caps on consumption. How do we kind of thread that in? Do you have any thoughts or any kind of advice?
I think it's really difficult. I think with physical items, with food or drink or other types of consumption, we have physical limits. And I think when it comes to our psychic lives, those limits aren't there. They are there, but they're probably at a more subconscious level. So Jennifer's talked a lot about deleting data. There's a psychic burden to that data. It's not just a physical burden. It's on our souls and our psyches, managing these millions of emails and thousands of OneDrive files. I think it's creating some sort of internal psychic burden. And I guess we're seeing some of the side effects of that. But I don't know, honestly, how we recalibrate that endless consumption thing.
So I would say one of the things that I have seen, there's a lot of talk starting to happen about, if you go back to the old ways of IT, which was when if you didn't have enough capacity, you had to make do. And actually, if I was to say right now in all your organisation, if there was suddenly, there was no more public cloud resource available tomorrow morning, you can't consume anything more, would all services stop and would you have no ability to implement anything more? Or would actually every organisation suddenly scrabble around and find really creative ways to redesign, remap, re-architect, repurpose, reuse? That's what would happen. The problem is we've become too attuned to the fact that we can just go and buy and consume more because it's immediately available. Even before the cloud world, we had virtualization came in, and suddenly people got really creative, and you were running your servers at 80% utilization, and then you say we need to buy more. Go, well, the boss hasn't signed it off, or the vendor can't deliver it for 4 weeks. You would make do. And that's the issue, is people have got so used to not having to make do, they just switch it on straight away in the uber consumption mode. And maybe we just need to shift back to that rule where actually nothing can come through unless it's actually been approved, justified, and we've made sure we've sweated every single thing else. Even to the extent where you start saying, you know what, the room booking system, does that have to be on 24/7? No, actually we could switch it off because no one's using it. All the services that actually aren't delivering the business value, you could replace them with more critical things that are required. So it is that definite, if we want to change it, we have to actually want to change it.
I think it's not just it's more than we just have to want to change it. We actually have to implement it's a bit of the, listening to you speak, it sounds like the wartime spirit of make do and mend, or make do and be innovative, and we have to channel that. And you see it a lot when we talk about sustainability, not just in technology but across everything. Consumption is everywhere and people are being encouraged to do things differently, but that takes time, and unfortunately we don't have that much of it when it comes to the whole sustainability and the climate change situation. But when it comes to sufficiency, we're going to have to look at how we define it for citizens and across government especially. And critically, if we can make do and mend, if there are examples like this, well actually, let's give it a go. I mean, we are looking in one login across all different ways of how we can address the storage issue, address our log files and all these things. But until we actually try it out, we don't know yet. But I promise you when we do, I'll let you know. You'll be the first to know, Ned. And we'll start implementing these limits, because shouldn't just be readily available all the time for no apparent reason, just because. We should have limits. Everyone has financial limits by virtue of the fact that we all earn a specific salary, or some people earn more, or billions if you're Jeff Bezos, that is. But we have limits already imposed on us. We can impose other limits to be better, to do better, to achieve more for society.
There's a question on Slido which is almost the flip side of a lot of the conversations we've just had, which is any thoughts on how to spot greenwashing claims of digital sustainability virtue, which are in fact villainy?
Mark?
They're endless. It's all about questioning how they've calculated whatever it is they calculated. So there's one of my favourite ones, without naming names, is the if you see any phrase of up to appearing in any of the collateral. So there's one which is, our AI platforms and services are up to 99% more sustainable. It's like, no, they're not. They're not in the slightest. It's just nonsense. And so it's about getting into the depth of the detail and the granularity of it and understanding what they've included and what they've excluded. And that includes things around IT asset recycling and disposal as well, because there's that phrase you hear parroted quite often, zero to landfill. Anyone who says that is lying to you, absolutely in every single way, because it's not actually factually true in the slightest. It's about what they're doing with it. Because there's the abdication of responsibility once they flow it down to their sub-supply chains, where they're not actually looking into the details of what's really happening once you flow down. So it doesn't mean they're always doing bad, but it's just they've tried to pass the responsibility to someone else. So it's coming down to, have they included Scope 1 emissions? Have they included Scope 2? Do they include Scope 3? What do they include from Scope 3? And if they have included their power-related emissions, are they gaming it by using the market-based approach, or are they using a location-based approach? So, in other words, including the benefits of renewable energy credits. If they have bought renewable energy credits, where did they buy them from? Is it additionality within the boundaries of the region in which they're operating, or have they bought them for the cheapest possible price somewhere in the globe? So there's also it's lots of intricacies, and exactly that spiralling conversation I've just gone through is what we're trying to address in the Scope 3 data collection thing we're looking at, which is to build the standardised metrics that can be used across government and the standardised questions. Because the challenge you have is people in supply chain and procurement are not specialists in this subject and cannot be expected to be specialists in it. So what we're trying to do is to equip them with the questions they need to ask, which have standard answers on them, so that they can use those answers to assess the quality of the data they've been given. So that means they can highlight where there might be issues around greenwashing or low data quality. And they can then use that in their procurement chain to actually beat the vendors with a big stick to make them do better. Use the commercial weight at point of procurement, because there's no better time to force people to give you better information than when you're about to spend a boatload of money with them. They're very susceptible at that point.
Mark, you haven't said your most famous phrase, which is question everything when it comes to greenwashing.
Question everything, yes, that's the one. It's trust no one, question everything. Anyone who talks to you about any of this stuff, always question them non-stop, because you can unpick things normally within 3 or 4 questions, and they start looking very awkward and shifting in their seats.
Yeah.
That's another T-shirt slogan for us to take away today.
Mark, are you going to set up a merch?
A sustainable one.
A sustainable merch.
I'm going to ask you a final question, Ollie, in a second. Somebody's commented on Slido just to say, I refuse to pay for extra storage space in my cloud account, which forces me to review the content.
Good. Whoever you are, you should stand up. Thank you.
So that's one thing that somebody has done to fix some of this. My final question to the three of you is, if you could wave a magic wand and fix this, what would you do?
I would give every single leader a measurable KPI that meant they got 0 pay if they didn't execute. And you watch how fast things get done. And that includes up to ministerial level as well.
I think I'd want to decouple economic growth from human growth. So we're seeing a lot of pushes for economic growth, which I guess maybe is important, but we're seeing very little on the human growth. So IT needs to be focusing on human growth and not economic growth.
I would wave that magic wand to make people actually take action and not just hold the leaders to account, but make it so it's everyone's problem and everyone recognise it. And they do not sit there and go, that someone else will deal with it. Or it's something for tomorrow, or nah, not. It becomes everyone's responsibility, and they are motivated to take action. They are motivated to make the difference, because it's not just the leaders. It's something we all have to do.
Brilliant. Well, Mark, Ishmael, Jennifer, thank you very much indeed.